Hey, welcome in. I'm Rita, and this is the story I'm telling myself. If you've ever felt like you're standing in your own way, you are not alone. Let's get into it. Hello, friends. Welcome to another week of the Story I'm Telling Myself podcast. I'm on the road today, but I found a wonderful little quiet spot where I could come alive and introduce you to my friend, Gerri, who's here to really take a vulnerable step and help us relate to some of those stories that are really holding us back. So I'm so glad that you chose to be here with us today. If you are live with us on Tuesday, please jump in the comments and say hello. Since I am remote, I'm going to be looking down a lot because I'm following the comments on my computer. So don't let that throw you if you're watching the video of this. And if you are listening to us on Thursday when we've dropped on the podcast channels, welcome to you too. We're so happy to have you with us. Gerri, it's finally here after months and months of time. It's your turn to be on the Story I'm Telling Myself podcast. Please, I won't do it justice. I want to let you introduce yourself. Tell everybody who you are.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much, Rita. It's such a pleasure and a joy to be here. I know we've been talking about this for a while, so just to be in the space with you is lovely and wonderful. My name is Gerri Sapinoso Hudson. For those who don't know me, I am the founder of Vision Bridge Leadership. After over 20 years working through a variety of global multinationals in working up to leadership positions, I decided to kind of go out on my own, and I now am a self-care coach, working primarily with leaders, particularly leaders of diverse teams, and really high women like myself, high-achieving women. And how I serve is at the intersection of emotional intelligence, breath work, and a number of practices around self-care. My hope is that those leaders who maybe were like myself, and you'll hear a little bit more about my story, find ways to care for themselves as much as they care for the teams that they support and lead. And it's not always easy. And so that's my story.
Well, we are going to get into it in a minute. We're going to welcome Jackie. Hey, Jackie. Great to have you with us. So glad that you're with us. And Meryl's back again. Good morning, Meryl. Glad to have you joining us. Two people who've become some friends that I love seeing in the comments on a regular basis. So again, if you were here, introduce yourself. This show is for you. We want you to ask your questions, to make your comments, so that we are really, as a community, engaging with our guests. And Jackie is already there. Self-care is so important. And I know you talk about that on the Just Jack's show as well. So let's get right into this, because this is what listeners are here for. Gerri, you are first. And, I was really surprised when my oldest daughter went off to college. There was a program for first, if you're the first one in your family to go to college, right? But you have immigrant parents, and so you were, the first in your family. Tell us a little bit about how that became the story that you told yourself and the impact that had on you.
Well, yeah, I think, we're all a product of our lived experiences, right? And I think that being a first generation American, Asian American in particular, the obligation, really, my stories that I learned were ones of obligation and achievement. Be humble, work hard, and the world that I grew up in, it was almost like I wanted to be American, but I had to hold on to my roots. And so I became part of what I learned eventually in grad school is called this third culture. And it's like this pull, these kind of from two polar opposites in a way. But I eventually found my way to achievement, right? So academic achievement, that's the system I grew up in. That was where I found recognition. I didn't grow up in a home with a lot of affection or emotional intimacy. So there wasn't a whole lot of talking about things, but I did find that I was seen and recognized through achievements at school, eventually achievements at work. And that helped me to feel very seen, by others and
And I'm going
valued.
to guess that your parents, like, that was part of their expectation of you,
Yeah,
that
I mean
that
that
that you would have this level of achievement in your life.
yeah, and I think they saw that I was gifted in that way, and they really pushed for the being able to achieve the American dream through the system of academic achievement, uh, all the way through college, graduate school, and then moving into a corporate role. I watched my father be successful in that. My mother had given up her career to be a stay-at-home mom until she could go back to work. We were old enough. And so I was kind of thrust as the oldest into kind of sharing that caretaking as well at home. But all the while, it was all the stories about achievement, academia, getting that great career with a great company. And these things were reinforced not only through the stories that I heard being told in family gatherings with my parents' friends, but also ultimately through the stories that I saw on TV about people like me, through other colleagues and fellow students at school, friends who had also been able to achieve that kind of level of academic success. And so it was reinforced to me that this was the way that I was supposed to go in order to live a happy life, that in order to achieve success, that kind of success would ultimately lead to my happiness. And I all of the narratives that I learned, I kind of grew up, I like to say, I grew up in corporate America because it was so easy to transfer kind of that parental guidance and narrative, particularly from my own personal experience. And I speak only from my personal experience into the workplace where there's this hierarchy and there are rules to follow. That was perfect environment for me. I could follow all the rules. I could, do more work. If people asked me to do more, I could do more. I would get, again, the recognition and the rewards. Now I'm making my own money. So it continued to be reinforced over time. And this is all stuff that I bought into, you know. It's yes, there were probably the cultural narratives that I saw Asian women in particular being portrayed in the media. What I knew about my family of origins culture and heritage versus kind of the American culture in and of itself, popular culture at that time. However, there was still this need to achieve. And that was what I saw. That was what I saw would help me find my place, would help me in a way to survive in a world that was not necessarily built for me, the me that I didn't even actually know because I was too busy living up to the expectations of other people, obligation, and then again, just being reinforced and recognized for achieving.
And I just want to pause here and say that I think a lot of our listeners can relate to this. Yeah, I'm thinking about Shirzad Shaman's positive intelligence book, and he describes what he calls the hyperachiever. And the hyperachiever is exactly what you're saying. It's that drive within ourselves that it is a good thing. This drive to really perform at an excellent level, to get the gold star or the 100% grade in academia. But when it becomes this constant drumbeat of this is the only way you do life, it is no longer healthy. And
Right.
many of us struggle with this. Many of us struggle with this is the pathway. I mean, I'm not Asian, but I can relate to so much of your story of coming up through. I was the first to go to college in my family, and then to get a graduate degree on top of that. Like I wasn't just going to stop. And so this feeling of I can prove my worthiness because I can just perform at this level that nobody can deny is excellence. And in doing that, I will always be safe.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. And I think too that that was my safe place. Whether or not the stereotypes about Asian culture, being more passive, compliant, sort of very, very respectful of authority and the hierarchy, waiting, not speaking over someone, really not taking up very much space in the room at all, contributing and achieving to the overall goal, but not taking up space. And I was content to do that. That's why I say that these are the stories. I bought into the stories myself. It was a very comfortable, safe place for me. I didn't want to be in the spotlight. I was happy to be recognized and rewarded. And I thought
and you told me from the outside looking in, your life looked pretty idyllic. You had family. So you had this wonderful family life. You had a lovely home. You're achieving at work. And you're bought into all of this. Like you are living the American dream. And then all of a sudden it switched from a dream to a nightmare. Why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about how the switch flipped for you?
Sure. Through my 20s and early 30s, like you said, it was very much about achievement. And I was I thought, happy. I had the energy and the drive to keep working hard through my career. And I had a beautiful family. I married someone that shared my goals and interests and passions. And I had worked my way up to more senior level in the company I was at the time. And I really thought it was like automatic pilot. It was so ingrained in me that it was something that I could just do automatically every day. And I remember it all came to a head within 48 hours. I had watched my husband, who hadn't been feeling well, and I watched him over the course of a couple of weekends and was just allowing him to rest, taking care of the kids. And that Tuesday, it was a Tuesday morning, I came back, and as I was getting ready for work, in the morning, I just asked if everything was okay. And in that moment, he revealed to me that he had been suffering from an addiction for a very long time, and I had no idea. And I had to go off to work that day. So I said, well, unfortunately, I can't talk about it right now, but we'll talk about it later. And so I went to work. I led a team off-site that day with one of my teams. I was so good, like I said, automatic pilot. I was just so good at being able to compartmentalize my worlds, and had a successful day, and then went home to deal with that. The following day, I went to work again. Happened to be my birthday. The office had kindly sang happy birthday to me the day before. And that morning, I learned, much to my surprise, that I was part of a restructuring and layoffs that came. So in a matter of 48 hours, my perfect family life kind of blew up. I have 4 small children at home at the time. And now I lost my job. And those were the things that I had built my sense of value and success and frankly, self-worth. I built my value around those things. Being a great family member, still pleasing my parents, as well as now trying to please my husband and raise my kids. And all of a sudden, my world just blew up in a bomb, and I was left with nothing that I knew that was my safety. My safety was gone. And I never thought that I would look back at this as a gift. And there was a period of time shortly after that, in the aftermath of it all, where I was extremely angry and, oh, why me? Looking to the heavens, and what have I done that has been so bad? Being what I eventually learned is this perfectionist of a person, trying to live up to this ideal of perfection for everybody else. What did I do that was so wrong? I really thought it was my fault. And that set me off and said, well, I can't just sit here in the dark. I have to do something for the sake of my kids, particularly, you know? And so I set out on trying to find a way to navigate life without all the things, to start from zero, without all the things that had defined me up to that point. Having my identity stripped away gave me the gift, to rebuild for myself, as myself. And I'm still doing that, to be honest. It is, for 20, 30 years, living by a certain script and then having to start from zero, picking back the pieces that maybe felt right again and leaving the rest that didn't serve me behind. And it is still a challenge. But
I want to dig into that in more detail, because this resilience that you're talking about, that you found, many of us, many of us have these moments in our lives, these unexpected disruptors that just totally throw us from everything that we know. And I think it's important to understand that it is okay. It is okay to feel all of the loss, right? You were feeling all of the loss, the loneliness, all of those things. Those are real. We can't pretend like, no, this isn't about pretending like those things are not real.
Exactly.
But you came to a place where you said, there has to be more than this.
Mm-hmm. I'm still here.
And yes, you're still here. And your children, you were like, this is not who I want to be for the people in my life. But you felt like you had to find some new way of being.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about sort of what were some of those thoughts that wanted to keep you stuck, and then what were some of those thoughts that really allowed you the permission that you needed to step forward and try something else?
Well, as someone who was an overachiever, striving for perfection all the time, meeting people's expectations, I think that was one of the things that I still struggle, but I had to learn to let go of the things that were out of my control, to see my circumstances merely as circumstances and not something that I could have any power over necessarily. To separate myself from my emotions and also allow myself to feel, like you said. I had learned that emotions had no place in my life. And I conveyed a sense of empathy and compassion. And I felt that for other people, but I had never turned that towards myself. And so this notion of self-care through what I learned in recovery rooms was a foreign concept. I had been so busy fulfilling everybody's expectations or striving to do that I never stopped to think about what it took to really take care of myself. And
again, I will say, I think that it is a very common story that many of us hold. It is that if I live my life good enough, clean enough, pure enough, if I do all the right things, I can be in control of my destiny. And I do believe that to some extent, but I also know and have lived that you can do all the right things and then life can still come at you in unexpected ways and completely disrupt that. And that recognition of, we as human beings, we want to make meaning out of everything. And part of our making meaning process is who's to blame. Yeah. Where is the blame going to land? And we will look outside of ourselves. And then when we don't get enough satisfaction, we turn inward. And for so many of us, that's where people get into alcohol abuse, drug abuse, other kinds of things, right? Because they turn that need to make meaning into a self-blame and self-flagellation. So how were you able to escape that, Gerri?
I tried every possible modality that I could try that was out there and available to me. I would say the very first thing that I did was just to turn myself to exercise. In the aftermath of learning about addiction being present in my family, I needed something to get the anger out. So I didn't take it out on my children, and I didn't take it out on my husband or my parents or my sister or anybody else. And I did some intense exercise through CrossFit. It helped me to have a time where I could push my body and not think about anything else and just change my state. And having that as the initial way to change my body's state and to see the results of a different kind, physical health was really powerful for me. That was the first thing. I eventually learned about meditation because I had learned about stress management, really trying to separate myself from my emotions and my thoughts spinning around in my head, particularly again, in sort of the aftermath of my life has blown up. What is my life now? To just find that sense of stillness and connect with what is not of this world to me, just that stillness that provides the deeper sense of purpose and meaning if I'm sitting there long enough, if I just simply wait and sit in the stillness and listen. I practiced meditation. I was a longtime yoga practitioner already, but now with everything happening in my life, it took on a very different meaning. It was like another ongoing meditation on the mat. I connected with friends. I had a recovery group, people who had been through the same things that I had, similar experiences to mine. Connection, social engagement, really reaching out to my friends and making it a point to the point of putting it on my calendar every week, my night out, that as a mom, I needed to go away and be by myself as a woman, as a person, connect with my friends so that I could come back and be a better mom. But it took putting it on my calendar and with the support of my husband saying, I got it. And I also had to let go and allow my husband to be present and to be a wonderful dad to our children. That asking for help was probably and can still be one of the hardest things. But it is so essential to my sense of well-being, is that sense of community and togetherness and understanding, because that's where, through connection, that's where I learn, and I think we learn as human beings, that we're not alone in our experience. Even if someone's life and their crisis and their bottom look totally different from mine, I know what it's like to suffer. And I can be there for a person, to hold that space for them, to allow them to feel, to not want to solve it, to not want to make it go away, which is what I had learned previously. Because like you said, it eventually comes out, and it did for me. When I really had burnout, I ended up in the ER with a cyst in my body that had to be excised. That was not pleasant. So community, knowing I'm not alone, and then eventually just slowing down. And then the biggest part, which is another tough one for me, is fun. Is just finding joy in the world. It doesn't always have to be this big grandiose thing, that it can be these small moments. It can be a piece of chocolate. It can be just a conversation with a friend, a cup of coffee, drawing a picture, reading a book, little moments of joy that I try to just bring back in my daily life. And that really kind of helped me to build the scaffolding for what I call self-care, my true authentic version of self-care. That's the other thing that I learned, is that what I had done for self-care up until that point, had been what I saw other people doing. Go to the spa, get that mani-pedi, get a massage. And go on a wonderful vacation with a beautiful wine tasting, whatever it is. Those were not, it's not that they were bad. They weren't terrible experiences, but did it really nourish me? That was not a question I was accustomed to answering for myself, because I was looking outside for all the answers for so long. That's where the
Okay,
answers
we're gonna talk about that. That's a really important point. I just want to say, hey Nick, welcome. Glad you're with us. So she said, suffering does not discriminate. Jackie jumped in and said, yeah, small moments are so important. And I want to back up to something else that Jackie said, which is life. It does. It stacks these roadblocks on us, and there is growth on the other side of that. And that's part of what we want to leave you with as listeners today is this, we want to instill this belief in you that there is this opportunity for growth on the other side of this. And what Gerri just said is so important. There is not one path. All those people that you are looking at who want to tell you the one path, they only have part of the answer, because the rest of the answer sits right here inside of you. And you need to learn to hear yourself and acknowledge and appreciate, instead of deferring what you know about yourself. So Gerri, you're going to share more of that with us. So talk more to our listeners about that. Hey, Felipe, I see you in the comments. Glad that you were able to join us today.
Yeah, what I was going to say, just jumping onto the point that you made, I think that knowing ourselves deeply is the most important thing that we can do. That's the most important advice that I give to my kids, to young people today, is to know yourself. Take the time to know yourself. What works for you, what doesn't work for you. It doesn't have to look like everybody else's. It doesn't have to look like what you see on social media.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about your journey of exploration there. Like, what are some things that you learned about yourself that like were almost awestruck by learning them, because you never really thought of that, and maybe even some of the things that you tried or whatever that you realized, like, this isn't it for me.
Yeah. So I would say the part that was most surprising to me was writing. I never considered myself to be a writer. I had a journal since I had a diary as like a young girl, and that was kind of my place for expressing myself, in kind of this safe space. And I have stacks and stacks of journals. Some I don't even know where they are, but that was the only kind of writing that I knew for me personally. Other than that, my writing had all been for work, I wasn't tremendously interested in literature or those types of things during high school. I was just going through a different phase. I was focused on different things. But eventually, during the pandemic, I ended up, I was in a Zoom room with the Global Wellness Institute. They were doing this thing called the Moonshot, and it was just this awesome experience to try to connect with people. I had been newly certified as a Search Inside Yourself teacher, which is a program that I facilitate in organizations. It's a mindfulness-based emotional intelligence program. And I was newly certified. So I had shared in a breakout room with what I was doing. And I happened to be with an editor from a magazine. And she asked me if I would be willing to write articles for her, for her publication that was targeted to leaders in the day spa industry. And of course, I just said yes. I've never written an article like that to be published ever. And I started working with a writing coach, and she helped me, Cassie, if you're out there, thank you, to see the power that my words had. The stories that I had within me about my experience, like we're talking about today, that could really be powerful ways to connect with others so that they might connect with that story within themselves and shine a light on parts of them that maybe they hadn't seen before. And so I found that was something that I'm now pursuing. I've published several articles in that publication over the last several years. And that has been an outlet for me that I hope to continue. I do find that is where I'm able to express a lot of the lessons that I've learned and the insights of connecting the dots between seemingly unrelated things and finding insight and wisdom in that. One thing I had thought that I was good at was drawing or painting. I've tried that, and that was just I showed some promise at a young age, but when I tried to go back to it, that was not something that I realized was for me. So those are just a couple of examples. I tried Reiki, energy as well. That type of healing, that was something that I tried, that I did. I think I feel something, and I believe that was effective in some way, but that hasn't been a modality that I've stayed with. It doesn't mean that there wasn't something valuable in it that I learned, but I tried it and it didn't stick. So those are just a couple of examples of things that I have tried, and through this journey of exploration, I'm still on it. I'm still on it.
I was just going to say that I'm noticing that you are really thinking about your healing as a journey, not a destination. That's what I hear
100%.
in what you're saying.
Yes, absolutely. And I have come to believe that we are all on a journey that is lifelong. It is never too late to learn more about myself. Even after all the years, and my children are now in college, it's never too late to start again. That's one of the lessons of my mindfulness practice, is the impermanence of everything. And it's never too late to start again. Try again, try something new.
Well, you reminded me of our guests from earlier in the season. Go back and listen to Robin Graham. But she talked about how all of us have healing to do and how it stays hidden for so long, for so many of us, until we have one of these disruptive events. And so this idea that we can all choose to be on this journey of healing without having to wait for everything to implode to get you there. And again, for you, Gerri, you had this moment of implosion, and you began to realize that it was as much of a gift as it was a curse for you, and you've really leaned into the gift of that moment.
Yes, I will say that I never thought I would look back at that experience in those early days as a gift. And now, 17 years later, I really view it as the turning point where my real life began. It's like making me well up to say that. It was the gift because I was willing to say, what else is there? What am I meant to do? And I'm willing to let go of those ideas in order to find what's truth for me. And
what is so beautiful, what is so beautiful about the timing of your episode, Gerri, is it is right behind Tasha Golden, Dr. Golden, who was with us last week. And her episode was about how life can become a trap, how we have this one story. You had this one story of yourself. You are the excelling first Asian woman in your family, out there leading the charge, showing everybody what is possible. But last week we talked about this idea of how when we get trapped by our one story, it becomes a cage. And you are, in your own way, echoing exactly what Dr. Golden shared with us last week about that, which is when the universe is conspiring, friends, to send us messages that we all need. And I think we especially need those right now when there's such healing to do throughout the world. Socially, there's so much healing that needs to happen. And if we were all on this quest of letting go of our sureness of who we are and what is right, and became part of this quest to say, what else? What else could be true? What else could be possible? And on the other thing that I hear in your story was reminding me of our dear friend Carmen Alvarez from the Wahasu crew. When she was with me last year on her episode, talked about a big part of the healing is turning outside of yourself. And I hear that in your story as well. This focus outside of yourself to how can you not only ask for help, but be help
absolutely.
to others.
Generosity and compassion, those plus gratitude, those are the things that really power my time now. That's what I try to live by every day. The old stories, I have to let go. There's a great proverb that I found when in the early part of my new journey. I found it at a Barnes and Noble store, but I loved it. And it was about letting go of the story, or letting go to the things that I wanted to control so badly, which was the story I felt like I still needed to get. It had been taken from me. And the universe was truly conspiring. And the proverb says, let go or be dragged.
Let go or be dragged. Woo! That is a good one. Yes.
I had been dragged and dragged and dragged, and I was choosing to hold on in so many different parts of my life, and not necessarily for the right reasons. And so my reclaiming my power to choose is what I think is ultimately the story. My power to choose to forgive. That was for me, not for the other person. It wasn't for my husband. It was for me. My power to choose to see other people in a different way. People who are different from me. I didn't talk about that very much, but I grew up in spaces where very few people looked like me. And so I grew to appreciate and find connection in people who look different culture, different everything, and I think that is the point of it all, is choosing to see what we have in common, what I have in common with someone, versus holding on to the story of how I was harmed, how someone did this to me, how this is a result of my upbringing, because, my mother told me something terrible about myself one day in the fit of her own issues, and that all that doesn't have to define me. I can choose who I am and how I show up in the world. And
which is totally connected. I don't with Dr. Fred Luskin's episode from March 8th, I think it was March 18th. So go listen to that, friends. You will get the masterclass from Dr. Luskin on I know, on how forgiveness is the path. It is the path to healing and happiness. And Gerri, I am so sorry to say that our time is at an end, but I want to show you there's some love in here. Erica came in to say you're the greatest and you have so much wisdom. Anna, I'm so glad that you are with us. And she said you are a great example. Thank you for sharing your personal journey of exploration. This has been very inspiring. And I know it's been inspiring. I am so happy that you said, I have something I want to share on the story I'm telling myself, and that we were able to make this time together, because I do see the work that you're doing, Gerri. It's important, sharing your story, being so authentic and true to even the hardest parts of it. That is what allows other people to know that that hurt inside of them is not something they're suffering alone. So thank you so much for joining us and sharing your story with us today.
Thank you for having me, Rita. I really appreciate it. It was such a pleasure.
Gerri has a little gift for you listeners. We will be dropping this in the notes for the podcast release. So go into the notes. She has a little guide that she wants to share for people who are trying to find their way, maybe in similar circumstances. So make sure that you head over to your favorite podcast channel to grab that. And then we'll make sure that we drop it in the comments on LinkedIn for all of our LinkedIn friends that are here. you'll be able to pick that up from the show notes on the event in LinkedIn as well. Gerri, it's been wonderful. Thank you for joining us. Come back again next Tuesday. I'll be back in my normal spot, and we will be having just another one of these wonderful conversations. Listeners, thank you so much for engaging with us in the comments, and we'll see you back here next week. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Oh, now I got to see if I can figure out how to play the outro. Let's see. Thanks for joining us. If you love this episode, leave us those 5 stars and be sure to share this with a friend. And if you didn't, don't worry about it. See you back here next week.